There we go. So Linda and Roger and I are going to be sharing some information with you today. We're going to be also sharing links and resources that you can follow up on later if you want to. Our social media information is here, and we'll put this in the chat for you, and I'll bring it back up again at the end. But we're also going to be sharing a YouTube recording of this session with you as well. So you can share it with your colleagues, or you can broadcast it if you want to, Denise, to whomever you want to. So there will be ways for you to reach out to us or find the resources that you need to follow up. So our guiding questions for today's webinar are, why would someone want a Global Seal of Biliteracy? And so Linda's going to be sharing some information about that with us. What are the benefits and ways of obtaining a Seal of Biliteracy? And that is also going to be something Linda addresses in her portion. How might proficiency testing benefit our learners along their journey to proficiency? So I'm going to talk about some things that have to do with a cycle, an assessment cycle that includes instructional practices and data analysis. And then Roger is going to talk with us about how this data can support and inform instructional practices in the classroom. So without further ado, Linda, I will turn it over to you. And I don't know if you want me to share the mouse with you so you can click, or if you want me to click for you. I can do either way.
You can just go ahead and click for me. I'll give you, like, some signal.
Okay. That works.
Well, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for kind of joining me. This is my favorite thing to talk about, is how do we get learners really excited and motivated, not to just be in your classroom and maybe earn a good mark or a grade, but actually to really work hard at getting better at the language that they're in the classroom for. And we've done lots of research, and we've seen it, by adopting a Seal of Biliteracy, that it just changes programs. Students are so excited. Parents are really proud because they see the accomplishment that their students get. And what's really exciting is we see students who might drop out or just sort of do the minimums begin to do the maximums, and the programs begin to grow, especially in upper levels where sometimes maybe they're, they have other distractions. And so what we really see, just not here, just, we see it in the US, we see it in other countries as well, is that when you begin with what's important to students, magic can happen. And so the first reason why we might want to measure someone's language proficiency is because they want to know if they're very good at it. I had a student one time who was getting the same grade this year, or that year, as she had gotten in a previous year. And so she said she was going to quit because she wasn't getting any better. Well, she had gotten better. She had acquired more language to be able to maintain that same grade a year later, but she didn't see that as progress. And so when we give a mark on a test or a score, or a percentage or any other kind of grade, it doesn't give them enough feedback for them to really realize that I'm making progress. I've achieved more. I've learned more. I can do more with the language, because the things that we usually give to measure that aren't very detailed, and they're not very granular. They're just sort of in, overall. And so the one thing that we really see about students is if they know they're good at something, they want to keep doing it. And so providing a proficiency test gives them that information. It also tells them where they need to focus if they want to improve. When I would do, for example, parent-teacher conferences, and I would talk to the parents, and they would say, well, what do they need to do? And I might say, well, they need to do better on their tests or their homework preparation. But now I can be really specific and say, they need to work on their writing. They need to use more complex sentences, or they need to, when they're doing their speaking, they need to, sort of be able to add more detail and give, provide more adjectives or more time frames. And so it's much more specific. And so measuring someone's language proficiency gives them feedback so they can improve, but it also celebrates that they've made progress. And I think that's been a really important piece. The other part about the why behind the whole, not just the seal of biliteracy, but also just this idea of testing, is that oftentimes a student would graduate from their program and they have a transcript that says they took a class. And maybe there's a grade for that class, but it doesn't really measure what they can do with the language. And it doesn't offer them, something they can do next. When they go into, for example, the job market, the employer might look at a major or a sort of minor or focus at the university level, but they don't look at their transcripts. And sometimes they don't even see what classes they really took. And so if you can provide students with something beyond a transcript, a document that celebrates their language learning and shows exactly what they've achieved, that gives the student an opportunity to use it for lots of other purposes. And that's where students are excited. Students are, when we asked in a focus group, what do you think is the value of a seal of biliteracy? The students said, well, I can use it when I get a job. It will make my career easier. I might be able to make more money. They didn't talk about getting a better grade or mark in a course. They didn't talk about university. They jumped right to work, the space of the job field where the money is. And so what we really find is students are excited and they're motivated by earning something besides just the grade or the mark in a class. So we'll go to the next slide. So what do tests measure? When we're looking at a proficiency test or it's a test of what the students can do, but it focuses on the whole picture of language development. So it's speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And that's important because a lot of students have a strength in one area, but not in another. My shy students, the timid students, that are embarrassed or afraid to speak in class, that's a challenge for them. But for some of my students who were not at all intimidated and wanted to sort of be on stage like a class clown all the time in class, weren't so excited maybe about writing. And so students have strengths. And when you provide a 4-skilled test, they'll see where their strengths are. And they'll also, again, be able to focus. So a test will measure all 4 pieces. And that's why we call it a seal of biliteracy. So it's not just bilingual. It's not that just I can speak and listen and understand in that other language, but I can also read and write. I have literacy skills. And those are more important as we look to the future career space. The second thing that the test will measure is what we refer to as can-dos. They're measuring what the students can do with the language that they've acquired. So it's not just, I know 20 vocabulary words, or I can fill in the blank with the right verb form, or I can, use past tense. It really is, I have all of these words I have, and I have some grammar structures, but I know how to put them together to do things that are important to me. I can ask questions. I can give directions. I can go to a store and buy something. I can make, so it's the things I can do with what I have, not just the parts of what I've learned in the language. And then the most important thing is these tests are now allowing students to earn actual credentials that can be used in the workplace. Because a credential, by definition, documents a skill or an ability. It's something that's measured through testing. It's proof of your skills that can be applied in a job force. So whether that's a computer skill or some other kind of trade skill, a language, being able to do a language can work with any career space, and it adds to it. So credentials are incredibly motivating to students, and the test will be able to measure what, not just if they qualify for a credential, but at what level. So the next slide, please. So what we've found is that these pathways, these credentials, really motivate students. And so the Global Seal is all about doing two things: helping students level up so that they continue to grow their language skills and get excited about moving to the next level. But it's also about helping them leverage their skills and sort of describe them or articulate or communicate them to their next steps, whether that's to university or potentially to a job or career employer space. And so we have a pathway that we've created to keep students informed of the progress they're making, but also to excite them about the next step. Because when we measure those 4 skills, the student will rarely be at the same level of skill in each category. So typically, especially for younger learners, if they've had a lot of exposure to the language, their listening comprehension might be very, very high, but maybe their writing is lower. And everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, but when you give the 4-skill test, now the student knows where those strengths are and those weaknesses are. And when they reach a threshold, they meet a level of proficiency in speaking, listening, reading, and writing, more than one or more of those skills is going to be at a higher level. So the student decides, oh, I just have to work a little harder and I can get to the next level of the ribbon or the next level of actual workplace certificate credentials. And so that's really what we've tried to create. So we have a pathway with ribbons for those students who are not yet at a Global Seal Biliteracy level, but we recognize them and keep them excited. And then the Global Seal itself has 3 different levels of certification. So we call them functional fluency. So that's when a student is able to survive and get by on their own. It won't be pretty. They'll make mistakes, but we talk about a sympathetic native speaker will be able to connect the dots and understand what they're trying to say. A great example of a sympathetic native speaker is their teacher. Oftentimes, the teacher has to sometimes figure out what the student meant to say when it didn't quite come out the right way. The second level is working fluency. And this is someone like an educator who can use the language every day. It's still not, maybe perfect, and they don't have lots of technical language maybe in lots of different areas, but they're more than capable of doing their work on a daily basis in the language. And then we have a high proficiency fluency level, which works with, for example, interpreters or people where, the language has to be very precise. And so we do that, and each certificate is serial numbered. So that means that it is digitally shareable. The students can share it with an employer, they can share it on social media, they can share it with a university. So we want to give them not just a recognition, but something to do next with that recognition. Next slide. So the Global Seal is a great and exciting sort of certificate for students to work toward because it's international. So you can see that it's been awarded now in a number of different countries. I think it's at 15 countries and counting. And it is available both on the ACTFL scale, which is the scale for proficiency most used in the United States. So if a student were planning to try to attend a university, for example, in the US, that might be the scale that they would want to use, because that's going to be the scale most comprehensible for US universities. However, the Global Seal is also available on the CEFR, or the European Common Framework of Languages. And so we see that framework is oftentimes used with some of our other international schools, especially in Europe. And you'll see that once the ribbons are available, as are the certificates with both scales. In fact, we provide certification in over 130 languages. So if your students have languages in addition to maybe the English test that you're talking about here, this would be another additional opportunity for them to earn more than one global seal in more than one language. And I think Roger will probably share that that the Avant Assessment is working toward a CEFR test that will be available as well. So your students could really have options depending upon their needs and what you choose to do as a school. Next slide, please. So this is my favorite sort of, I guess, motto for language teaching, and that's to celebrate what you want to duplicate. So if you want students to do it again, you have to celebrate it, right? So if they did really well on the test, I let them know what it was that they did that was so amazing. When they do well on a project, you want to encourage that because they'll repeat it. Oh, keep doing that because that was really great. Well, it works the same way with recognition events. And so if you have a Global Seal of Biliteracy certificate to provide a student, do it in a celebratory way. Make it public. The parents are really proud. The administrators are aware of the success of your program. So that's a really big piece because they see it not only with the students, but also with what the recognition is that they have earned. And so we suggest, you make it a big deal. You invite parents and administrators, perhaps even, media, newspaper, radio. You share it on social media, but you also share the benefits. For students, that might mean some advanced placement at the college level. They might be able to go into a higher level course. They might be able to earn scholarships. And we see that frequently with our Seal of Biliteracy recipients. And if you want to make it even more special, the Global Seal program is completely free, but we do have some optional medals and pins that, make it really more exciting for students. So again, make it as big of celebration as you can, because there are students that are not yet to that level that are watching. And that's going to motivate them in your classes in the consecutive years as they work toward their own Seal of Biliteracy. And I think there's one more slide on my piece, I think. Yes. So finally, just as, to close, why do students want this? How might you articulate this for them, for their parents, and for administrators? Is a Global Seal is a credential that increases opportunity. So we really are creating a way for them to link to their next steps, to leverage their language skills, and to continue to keep them encouraged. So the Global Seal serial number means that it goes on a CV or on a resume. It actually goes right into LinkedIn under licenses and certifications. And you can see an example here of a teacher. This is a teacher from the state of Maryland in the US, and she's earned her Global Seal in French. The teacher in the lower left is from Peru, and he's earned his Global Seal in Spanish and English. And so we see that these students, as well as the teachers themselves, have an opportunity to demonstrate language skills. And you can document them for lots of purposes. In the workforce, many times that employment might even come with more money if the person has a documentation of their level of bilingualism. And so this is, we've really tried to give you a way to, and do it for free, to support your the learning from the very beginning all the way unto the end, and even to something that might serve to recognize you as an individual or the teachers that you work with. And I think that's the end of my slides.
Yes, thank you, Linda.
You're welcome.
So do any of you have any questions about anything that Linda presented that you'd like to ask before we move on?
Maybe, well, I know the process because I've done it for some of the students that we certify their English proficiency with Avant, but maybe about telling them where to, once they take their Avant test, where can they apply for their Global Seal? I think.
Yes, and I think Dawn included that on that, maybe that second slide where there are the links. So
Oh, yeah, and you also share them here. Thank you very much.
yes, and I'll go, and I will also just sort of add that as well to the chat.
Mhm.
Oh, so it's
I think we added it.
oh, you already did. Great. And yeah, so it's an application that just takes a little bit of information about your school, a little bit of contact information, so we know who to follow up with, but there's no like, oh, we approve or disapprove of your application. We just use that as a way to provide you with your next steps, which include a candidate form where you would enter in the names of the students that qualify and provide us with their test scores. And I always just caution, spell correctly, because that form will, whatever goes on that form will go on the certificate. And so we do that as a way to automate things so we can keep things free to you to provide that. And then the scores are uploaded along with that candidate Excel form sheet. And we try to ship those out within 1 to 2 weeks. Mail time differs, of course, internationally. It can be a little more challenging, but we really are excited to do it. So the process is not difficult, but does begin with a test.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, well, we'll keep moving on. The next part, did you have a question? Did you have a question? Okay. The next part we're going to talk about is how the proficiency test can help to benefit your learners and their journey to proficiency. So this is going to be a little bit more focused on actually what's happening in your schools and in your classroom. We at Avant have been really trying to be able to communicate that this is all part of a cycle. So if you really want to help your learners reach that level where they can get a seal, it's not something that's just one and done and then you never revisit it. It's part of a cycle that you want to use the data to inform your practice, to inform the students of where they are on their journey, and then to begin to help do all the things that you have to do to help move them on so that they can reach their goal. So when we talk about that, the 4 areas that we really focus on are assessment, analyzing the data, accelerating the learning, and that can be for both teachers or administrators or students, any and all of those. And then them being able to show what they can do and through their achievement, which is what Linda has been talking to you about with the Global Seal. You really can start at any of the 3 areas: assess, analyze, and accelerate. Because if you were to begin by testing, that's going to be your ground level baseline data that you're going to use to begin to inform your journey to proficiency. And that could initially, even before you test with the stamp test, for example, it could initially be with internal data that you're using that may be performance data from your students in the class. And then you want to be able to analyze that data, have some notice trends of where you have strengths and weaknesses. And Roger's going to show you a little bit more in detail about some tools that we provide to help you be able to do that more efficiently. And then the accelerate part is where you begin to use what you've learned through the data to inform your practice, to set targets, to look at where you have gaps or needs in the learning process that you need to focus more practice in a certain skill, for example. And then the goal is that within this cycle, as you begin to be more purposeful and focused, you're going to be able to help your learners achieve the level that they want to achieve and be able to show what they can do. So just a few things just to dive a little bit deeper into each of the areas. When we think about that assessment piece, in our program where I used to be the supervisor of our program, we really tried to be thoughtful, and we did a lot of learning around some of Rick Dufour's work, where we talked about what do we want learners to know and be able to do? How will we know when they've learned it? How will we respond when some students don't learn or don't know it? And then how will we extend the learning for students who are already proficient in an area so that we can continue to move them forward? So this is a way to kind of frame your thinking about this process. What do we want them to know and be able to do? Do we have targets for proficiency? Do we know how well they need to be able to perform on the test to get that seal? So what do we want them to be able to do? How will we know if they're able to do it? That's going to come from the assessment itself. That's going to come from informal data that you may be using in your own assessments in your school. And then that external data that they will get from the stamp test, that is going to validate that performance and give you something that's more standardized. And then the response part, how you respond if they're not there yet, or if they've exceeded wherever there is, that is the part where you're trying to focus on being purposeful in your instructional practice and being responsive to the needs of your learners. When we talk about the analyze part of the cycle, this is where we're able to actually look at where the strengths are, where we may see challenges, where we may see gaps, where we may have notices of trends, either within certain groups of students. I don't know about you all, but I sometimes had certain classes that just consistently performed strangely or above or below where everyone else thought someone should be at a certain level. So you begin to have notices, and the data helps you begin to look into the why behind it. Why? I wonder why this class always does certain things. It also helps you to begin to recognize in your instructional practice where you may be spending too much time in a certain area or not enough time in another area. We often see when we're doing work with districts or programs that they may have really strong interpretive skills like reading or listening, but their productive skills may be much weaker, especially often in speaking. And that typically happens because the practice in that classroom may be very teacher-centric, or where the teacher is the one with the voice, but the students are not given enough time to use their voices. And the data is what it is. It surfaces that this is an area that needs more practice. So that test can really, really help you hone in on how to better support your students so they can reach their goals. The other piece is about actually implementing the practices that the data has shown you need to implement. So being able to accelerate the learning by being purposeful. You know, if we don't have a plan and a pathway that we're planning to reach our goal, we'll just get lost on the map and end up wherever we end up. But if we know our goal is intermediate mid, and we know what an intermediate mid student has to be able to do, then we can begin to plan backwards for very purposeful experiences for those students to have so that we know they'll reach that goal by the time they need to reach it. So the data helps us track if we're on the right pathway. It's like our GPS to be able to reach our destination. And then, as Linda was saying, our destination is where we get to celebrate that we reached our destination. So this is where, sometimes if you benchmark test along the way, you're able to celebrate those little rest stops along the way. Like you made it to the next rest stop before you have to get back on the road and keep going. These celebrations are really important because it helps the learners begin to own that journey themselves. They begin to have a real personal vested ownership of their own learning. And eventually, it's not going to be because a teacher is encouraging them or because they just want to get a seal. It's going to be because their learning is going to be because they're finding joy and success in that journey. And so that's really important in helping them go beyond. You know, they're not going to leave us at a K-12 level, at a professional level, right? But that professional level for a seal could be something that we plant as a seed in their minds that they want to pursue even after they leave us. And they'll know how to do it if we've been giving them these tools all along the way. So these are the areas that we kind of talk about in that cycle: the testing, the looking at the data to inform our practice, the accelerate part. And I put here more learning because that's part of what in our division at Avant, our professional learning, is to help teachers be able to have those notices and then apply and implement the strategies to create change. And then the achieve part is that seal of biliteracy part, or the pathway ribbons, so that they can see where they are on that journey. So that's the part that I had to share. I don't know if any of you have any questions about anything before we move on to Roger.
Yeah, it was pretty clear. Thank you, Dawn.
Okay, great. Okay, Roger, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, and I'll take the mouse if you don't mind, because I have a
was
lot
going
of
to say,
slides.
I think you might want the mouse. Hopefully you have more success with it than I did last night when I tried to hand the mouse over. Okay, so it's in your hands. Give it just a few seconds to make the journey to you, and you should be good.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, first of all, like Linda said, at Avant Assessment, our Stamp 4S test and 4SE test, they are currently based on the ACTFL scale, which is what is most commonly used in the United States. But we are very close in developing a test based on the European Common Framework. And I don't have dates that I'm comfortable giving, but we're getting close and we're really excited about it. So I have on here the Stamp 4S and 4SE. So Stamp is a test. STAMP stands for Standards-Based Measurement of Proficiency in 4 skills, which is reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And then we have the 4SE test, which is the 4 skills, but it's designed for elementary learners. So we have that available for both sets of learners. What we're going to look at today is the Stamp 4S for the older learners, the test that will qualify for the Global Seal of Biliteracy. And we'll go through fairly quickly, taking a look at what the test kind of looks like, and then we'll look at what the data and the reports look like, and as both Linda and Dawn mentioned, what you can do with that, and how we can award students and other things. Let's see here, not advancing. There we go. Okay, that's advancing a little faster than I wanted. Okay. Here we go. So on the Stamp 4S test, test takers will log in. Everything is delivered online, so it's all done on the computer through the internet. And as they first log in, you can see that reading and listening are highlighted because those are the sections that are first available. On the Stamp 4S, once a student completes the reading section, then they can begin the writing section. But they can't start with the writing section because the prompts that they'll be asked to respond to are based on the level of proficiency that they reach in reading. And then that also happens with listening and speaking. So once a student has completed the listening portion and we know what their proficiency level is, then we can give them the prompts at the appropriate levels for them to produce their best language. So if a student were to begin with the reading section, oh, sorry. This is just a quick overview of the approximate time that it takes the average test taker. So the reading section, as well as the listening section, are each made up of 30 multiple choice questions. and test takers take on average 35 to 40 minutes to complete that, those sections. And then scoring is available immediately on the reading and listening, because the scoring on those sections is done by the computer. And then writing and speaking, students will receive 3 prompts in each one of those sections. So the average test taker takes 20 to 25 minutes to complete the 3 reading prompts, and another 20 to 25 minutes to complete the 3 speaking prompts. And on those sections, scores are typically available within 7 business days. And those are scored or rated by human raters, who are generally current or former teachers and professors, and they're trained frequently to make sure that their scores are accurate and consistent. So as a student starts with the reading section, they'll have a situation here kind of describing a scenario, and then they'll have a text. You can see this is a very simple text, a very beginner or novice level text, which is an image. And then they've got answer options on the side, and they just click the most appropriate response. And you can see down here, there is a status bar, so they can see how far along they are within that section. And as I mentioned, there are 30 questions in the reading section. And so a student would just read the text or view the text, click on the appropriate response, and then click next. And as they go through that, on the stamp test, it's actually adaptive, meaning that as the student responds to questions, the computer is seeing how well they're doing, and if the student needs more challenging questions, it will provide them more challenging questions. If they need less challenging questions, then they'll receive less challenging questions, so that throughout those 30 questions, they're never really receiving questions that are too far above their abilities, but they're being appropriately challenged all the way through. So as they answer the questions and click next, then they move on to the next question. And as they complete the reading, now you can see that writing is available as well as listening. So if a test taker were to continue with the writing, they would come here and they'll see an image to help with the prompt. They'll have a prompt here, and then they'll also be able to listen to that prompt in the testing language by clicking the button. And then here they have a response or an answer box where they can type in their response. And as I said, the reading section typically takes 35 to 40 minutes. Writing takes 20 to 25 minutes. So the test can be broken up. So if you have limited time, or you want to break the testing up into multiple days, and you're coming up on the end of your testing time, you can just tell the students to click stop test. And that will log them out of the test. And when they log back in during the next testing time, then it will pick up where they left off. So they won't be missing anything. As a student enters the listening section of the test, it looks kind of like the reading. So they'll have a brief situation, and then they'll have an audio that they can listen to, as well as an image to accompany that. And then they'll click on the most appropriate answer, and then click next as they're ready to submit that answer and move on. And then the speaking section, again, there's an image with a prompt, and they're able to listen to that prompt in the testing language by clicking the button. And then they just click to begin recording, and it will record their voice. You can see here, it will also show if the microphone strength is weak or strong, so that they have an idea of if they need to maybe adjust their microphone or something to make sure that the sound quality is good. And then after they finish their recording, they can play it back and hear what their response was. And sometimes my students would think, oh gosh, I just don't like the way I said that, or maybe the sound quality isn't very good. So they can just come over here and delete that and re-record. Or sometimes they would listen back and think, oh, I forgot this important detail that I wanted to add. So there's a button here for them where they can add to their recording. as they listen back to that, they can make sure that the sound quality is good so that they can get the most appropriate, or so they can get an accurate score on their test. And as they finish, let's see, it's not advancing for me. There we go. So as the student finishes, they're done. And that for me is where the fun really kind of began, because I loved diving into the data, seeing what was going on. And let's see here. There we go. So for me as a teacher, after my students would test, I would log in and I'm able to see group averages. So in my situation, my testing group was a particular level of language. So I had my Spanish 4 students, for example, and so I could look at the average scores of all of my Spanish 4 students. And I can see how these numbers align to the actual guidelines. So the numbers, a number 1 means novice low or lower novice, 2 is a novice mid, 3 is an upper novice or novice high, and so on and so on. And it was really helpful to be able to look at this. So the example I gave was my Spanish 4 students. The goal that we had was that students would be at a score of 5 or intermediate mid in all 4 skills. And so if this is my Spanish 4 class, I can see, well, gosh, reading is a little bit low. I wonder what's going on there. And I can come down here and I can see how many students scored where. And that's really helpful because I can see here, it looks like 44% of my students are still in the novice range, where we're hoping to be in the middle of the intermediate range. So now I know that I've got, what is that, 9 or 11 students who are in that range, and I want to find out who those students are so that I can start adjusting my instruction to them and help them get to where they need to be. I can also see that I've got some really high performers who are in the advanced range here. And now that makes me start thinking, well, I need to identify who those are because I need to give them appropriately challenging tasks as well. And I can see that for all of my skills. And so in my situation, when I was teaching, the lowest skill that my students always had was listening. And it was really frustrating for me. And as I noticed that over time, that was consistently the skill that was lowest, I started to realize, like, that's probably because of me. So now I need to start reflecting on my teaching practices and why are my students' listening skills typically lower? And as I did that and started to ask my supervisor, we noticed that across our district, across many teachers, that was a common problem that we had. So we started to look for professional development around listening specifically, because it was a common or a shared issue that we all had where we wanted to improve. The data can also be printed out. You can print out group reports, individual reports, and we'll look at those in just a minute. The writing prompts, this I maybe should have left off. This is referring to, we have a handwritten writing option. So if you would prefer your students to write by hand instead of typing, you can come in here and print off their prompts for them. That's what that is. Then you can also download the test taker data. It downloads into an Excel file or a CSV file so that you can use that data for your own purposes and create other charts and graphs and things. And then you can also filter results by date. So if you want to look at the 2019 administration of the test, you can go in there and look for that. If you want to look at the 2022 administration, you can look at and find that. And then this is the individual test taker scores. So as you scroll down on your results page, this is where, so we've seen the averages for the class or the group, and we've seen that there are certain, or that there are a number of individuals who are at a particular level that we need to maybe adjust instruction for. This is where I can see them. So I'll see them by their name. I can also see their scores, and I can click on any of those scores to pull up information quickly and see what those scores mean. And so, let's see here. This is what that would look like. If I were to click on a writing score, then it pulls up the student's writing. It shows a little bit of everything, all of the data, but it jumps right into their writing. And it shows me what they scored on each of their prompts. And I can even click on that. I can click on response 1, and it will pull up what the prompt was, how they responded. And that was always really nice for me to be able to look at with my students, to go back here and say, okay, you got 3 scores of 6, which is intermediate high. And so then we could look at the response and say, look at all these things that you did so well. And we could really help them identify very specifically their strengths. We could also talk with them and identify the areas where they can improve to continue progressing to the next level. So that's a really powerful tool. You can also do the same with the speaking, where you'll see their prompt, and then you can play what their response was, and they can hear themselves and again, point out the things that they are really doing well and areas where they can continue to improve. And then this is a way you can measure growth over time. So I blocked out, this is one of my actual students' data. So I blocked out her name, but you can see here, over here, you can see which years she tested. So the top one is her test in 2016, then 2017 and 2018, and the scores here. So this column would be reading, writing, listening, speaking, and then her overall composite score. So this student in 2016, when she was in 10th grade, she scored 7, 5, 5, and 4. And then her next year, she scored 8, 6, 7, and 6. So there were some big improvements made because we were able to dive into that data, look at what her responses were, and she was able to see it and really kind of set her own goals and take control of her own learning. And then her last year with me, her data overall stayed the same. But then within reading, she actually did show some improvement. So that was really nice. But it's a really nice way to be able to measure student growth every single year or every time they test, which might not be every year, but you can check in at key points to be able to identify their growth and how they're doing. And then this is an example of a student report. So that student that we were just looking at, this is her report from her last year with me. So we see her scores in each skill, her composite score, and then it breaks down right here where she's at with her reading, gives a description of what learners at that level can do, and it also gives suggestions as far as things that they can do to continue growing and developing in that skill. So that was really nice. I would always print this off and I would go over it with my students. I could send it home to their parents. And I always encourage my students, to Linda's point at the beginning, I always encourage them to take this to their workplace to show their employers what they're able to do with the language, and tell them, you know, whatever vocabulary I need to do this job, that's really easy. And then once I have that, this is what I can do with it. And so it was really nice to have students come back and say, hey, I got a raise at work, or I got more opportunities, or they want me to help the Spanish speakers that come into the bank or at the restaurant or wherever they were working. And so it was really nice. And it's a really nice piece to go along with the Global Seal to help, like Linda said, quantify their language skills. They don't just show up and say, oh yeah, and by the way, I speak Spanish, I'm a good Spanish speaker. Well, what does that mean? Because anyone can say that. But this really helps identify to employers and to others how well they're able to do that. So that's a very quick walkthrough of the test and the data. And I'd be happy to go deeper with anyone at any time. But any questions that there might be at this point, I'm happy to help out.
Our participants are really shy, but I'm sure they're gonna send me all their questions later. I just want to go back and to say that in LEC, in Languages and Education Consulting, we're really happy to work with Avant, especially because our goal is to bring our English coordinators, school English languages academies, these kind of instruments, these proficiency tests that provide them meaningful information so they can improve their English programs. So as you mentioned at the beginning, thank you very much, Linda. What we really want are people that are already working with Avant here in Mexico. And I mean, I'm really proud to say that Avant is getting more and more attention here in Mexico, is that they actually take advantage of take the exam, the Avant exam, take advantage of the results and then apply for the Global Seal, but mostly that they can see all the advantages and everything that they can do and prove and gain by getting the Global Seal, which you mentioned. It's easy to get, to apply for. It's just, it's everything online and it's free. So, so thank you very much for mentioning everything that they gained by applying for their Global Seal. And also something that we emphasize when visiting schools and every time that a language academy asks for our advice for a proficiency test and they ask for recommendations, we like to tell to guide them and to tell them that they should explore more about or take more advantage about the results, how to analyze the information so they can, as you mentioned, Don, and as you wisely mentioned again, Roger, there are tons of things that they can do with that information. Like it's useful information not only for the coordinators, that they can actually know where the program is going, whether it's a good program or they need to take some decisions in something that they should be improving. But also we do that with our coordinators. We tell them that they should really pay attention on the information, take their time to analyze it, and also to show their students how to understand and read those results. So basically, students, when they're aware of the information that they're receiving, I mean, they can, as again, you mentioned, realize that they're doing great in certain skills, that some other skills require a little bit more practice, and they can feel proud of themselves and their own achievements. So thank you for mentioning that. This is something that we are always telling our coordinators and our language departments to pay special attention to that information because it's really, really useful. So then again, I really appreciate that you're recording this and that you took the time to explain all the advantages of certifying and to taking this language proficiency test, to getting to know a little bit more about Avant and how it looks and everything that we get by taking that proficiency language exam. And then again, some of the things that we really like and we emphasize them with our school coordinators, or students, everyone that is interested in knowing more about Avant, is that, well, you get fast results. This is something that it's really important because sometimes we take an exam and then we need to wait like a month. By the time we wait for that period of time, we forget on the first place what we took the exam for, or we were just like too eager to get the results. So getting fast results is a huge advantage for tons of reasons. And the format, the content, I really invite people that is here, and I also invite and share with our people here in Mexico and the different states we work with that are asking for more information about Avant. I usually share the sample, the free mock test or sample test that you got online so they can get the idea on how easy it is to navigate or to work with the exam, and so they can get the clear idea of the information and the piece of language that they're going to be testing. And so thank you very much for being with us and for sharing this and for recording this so I can send all this information to the rest of the people that couldn't be here today.
Absolutely, Denise. It was our pleasure. I think thank you for helping organize this on your end. And I'll be sending you a link that you can share out with everyone so that you can use it however you need to use it. But I'm very appreciative of your efforts to help push this forward in your area with your coordinators and help them better understand. And Linda and Roger, thank you too for presenting today and sharing the information you shared. And Denise, if any of your coordinators or if you have questions later, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Any one of us will be happy to get back with you, or if we don't know the answer, we'll see if we can find it and help you any way that we can.
Thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Linda, you're muted. Are you trying to talk?
As a closing invitation, the Global Seal is matching classrooms with classrooms around the world. So if your students would like to partner with another classroom that is learning English, speaks Spanish, learning Spanish, speaks English, I put the link into the chat. It's a free event, takes place over a course of 3 months with some recognition and certificates for teachers at the end. It's very similar to the Erasmus e-twinning groups. And some of the activities are a 5-minute activity you can do with the classroom. And there's some the activities that are, take a little bit more time, but they're completely up to the choice of the teachers. So I put that link there. The deadline to sign up is in 3 or 4 more days, so October 3rd, but feel free to be invited. We have over almost 500 classrooms now that speak 30 different languages combined. So please feel free to join us.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. And we shall see you again at some point.
Sure.
Nos vemos.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.